No borders. In 2014 and 2022, negotiations in Saudi Arabia. Russia will not make any territorial concessions. A new coalition, joint exercises of Russia, China and Iran. Canada is ready for war with the USA and America is withdrawing from NATO. The North Atlantic Alliance's exercises will take place without the USA. You can catch these and other news in the latest episode of Hell's Point. No borders. In 2014 and even in 2022, negotiations in Saudi Arabia have already begun. Russia will not make any territorial concessions. What to expect from the negotiations, and will Russia agree to a ceasefire at sea and in the air? You can watch this right now.
This will be a pivotal week. This week, separate meetings of high-ranking officials from the Trump administration will take place in Saudi Arabia, not only with the Ukrainian delegation but also with the Russians. This is reported by CNN. A source from the American television channel refused to disclose who will be present at the negotiations. However, the report mentions top officials from the US president's administration. To Jeddah, as reported earlier by the media, will head Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Trump's national security advisor Mark Walters, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. The meetings with Ukrainians and Russians will be held by the USA at different times, and separately from each other. The American leader even managed to announce the future of the negotiations, telling reporters on board his plane, Air Force One, that this week there will be significant events for Ukraine and Russia. At the same time, in Moscow, even Riss denies that negotiations with the USA are taking place. The representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, told reporters that a new round of negotiations with Washington and Saudi Arabia is not planned. So, who to believe is still a big question. However, it seems that the Kremlin is already preparing for the pressure that Donald Trump will exert on them to end the war. On Skabeyeva's propaganda shows, they are currently considering all options. But supposedly, they say it will be worse for everyone.
Well, then, there were so many international problems, just like that. And what do we have here? Will they send troops there and impose sanctions? Oh no, we didn't see which one. Yes, that's how it was. So should we start then?
Ukraine will try to convince the United States to resume intelligence and military support at bilateral talks in Saudi Arabia. As the Financial Times writes, citing fans, Kyiv is ready to offer Russia a cessation of long-range strikes with drones and missiles and hostilities in the Black Sea. One of the Ukrainian officials told the publication that in the short term, Kyiv will prioritize repairing ties with the US. In contrast, two European officials claim that Kyiv views progress in ceasefire negotiations as a favor in exchange for the restoration of intelligence and military assistance. Representatives of Zelensky's team have outlined the red lines for the upcoming negotiations with the Americans. According to the British publication The Economist, Kyiv will make it clear to Washington that any peace agreement that limits its ability to rearm and forces it to recognize occupied territories as Russian or interferes in internal politics, for example, by insisting on holding elections, is unacceptable. It is known that the Ukrainian delegation at the negotiations will be represented by the head of the Office of the President, Yermak, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kuleba, the Minister of Defense, Umerov, and the Deputy Head of the Office of the President, Palisa. But despite the intentions of the Ukrainian delegation in the Trump administration, the news agency Reuters writes that US officials plan to use negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation in Saudi Arabia, partly to determine whether Ukraine is ready to make significant concessions to Russia to end the war. The US delegation will also be watching for signs that the Ukrainians are serious about improving relations with the Trump administration. However, what exactly will the American president be seeking in the negotiations? It's still unclear. Influential. The German newspaper Bild, citing its own sources, reports that there will be no assistance from the US until Zelensky resigns. Thus, Donald Trump is trying to force Ukraine into negotiations with Russia. But does the owner of the White House understand the consequences of unequal negotiations? Question is open.
Joint naval exercises of the new alliance or the Security Belt 2025? Is this a show of strength or preparation for a new war? Russia, China and Iran are gathering in the Persian Gulf to expand their defense capabilities. What does this mean and what should we prepare for? Watch in this video.
Russia is conducting exercises with Iran and China in the Persian Gulf.
And these military exercises that will take place with Russia and China, well, since it's going to be in the Persian Gulf, Iran is also joining in. This is a demonstration from Russia that there is no, and China and Iran remains its ally.
Ships for the naval exercises called Security Belt 2025 are gathering at the Iranian port of Chabahar. The West's territoriality is not reported.
The geopolitical context, among other things, includes the fact that the US is asking Russia to be a mediator in a conversation with Iran, in essence, pressure Iran to abandon its nuclear program. Otherwise, the US supports Israel in the desire to strike Iran.
Iranian media reports that the parties plan to work on combating piracy, terrorism, exchanging information on maritime rescue operations, and generally expanding their military cooperation. It is noted that the Iranian army already conducted exercises in the same region in February, ostensibly to strengthen defense capabilities against any threat.
When it comes to how this will affect relations with the USA, it will only be the USA that will pull Russia back as a country through which they can work. Or these reassurances could overshadow all the moves Russia has made in the past week to normalize its relations with the USA.
The Ministry of Defense of China reported on the exercises. It is also claimed that China will send its destroyer against them.
China is not ready to give Russia to America, that's for sure. The second question, as I mentioned, is what will the reaction be from the American side? And really, does only China believe that Russia remains on the same team with it? Or are these beliefs an attempt to show that we are together, while at the same time, relations with the USA will continue to develop? And what scares China at this moment? This is what Russia might ask the USA in exchange for Ukraine. Rather, to propose to the USA not to allow China into the Arctic.
As observers, Azerbaijan, South Africa, Oman, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Qatar, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and Sri Lanka will be present at the exercises. It's worth noting that similar exercises were conducted by the Russians in 2022, just a month before the full-scale invasion. Similar exercises also took place in 2019, 2023, and 2024.
Canada is ready for a trade war with the USA. We and the USA are attacking Canadian families. The new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, will not let America make Canada a part of itself. Canadians didn't ask for this fight, but they're accepting the challenge. For more details on this and other news, stay tuned.
In the midst of a trade war against the USA, Canada has elected a new Prime Minister. He was the former Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney. He won the leadership contest of the Liberal Party by a huge margin against former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is of Ukrainian descent. Carney's first words as Prime Minister were directed exclusively at his neighbor.
Americans want our resources, our water, our land, our country. Think about that. If they succeed, they will destroy our way of life. In the USA, healthcare is a big business. In Canada, this is a right. Canada will never become a part of America in any form. We didn't ask for this fight, but Canadians are always ready when someone else throws down the challenge. So, Americans shouldn't have any illusions. In trade, just like in hockey, Canada will win.
Donald Trump, during his term as the 47th President of the USA, imposed a 25% tariff on goods from Canada. Carney's predecessor, Justin Trudeau, responded in kind. By the way, he served as Prime Minister of Canada 10 years. New Prime Minister Mark Carney said he would continue the policy. Trudeau. The tariffs against the USA will remain in place until the Americans start respecting their neighbors.
As the Prime Minister just said, Donald Trump imposed unjustified tariffs on what we produce, on what we sell, on how we make a living. He is attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot allow him to win.
The total amount of military aid from Canada to Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion has reached $3.1 billion. This beats multi-purpose drones, armored combat support vehicles, anti-tank weapons, firearms, howitzers, M37, and ammunition. In addition, funds were allocated for the training of Ukrainian F-16 pilots. And with Canada's support, over 43,000 military personnel from the armed forces of Ukraine have been trained. These may not be the largest numbers, but the aid comes regularly, and Canada fully supports Ukraine. Mark Carney hasn't said much about Ukraine, and not very often. Less than a month ago, he stated that he is very proud of the Canadian government's position on supporting Ukraine and fully supports these efforts.
I will continue to do so. Ukraine's path to membership in the European Union and NATO is something I support.
Mark Carney is now 59 years old. He earned his doctorate at the University of Oxford. He was the head of the Bank of Canada for 5.5 years. Then he became the head of the Bank of England, and he served as the UN Special Envoy for Climate and Finance. In addition, he worked as a consultant, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau during the COVID-19 pandemic, and led the Liberal Party's caucus on economic growth. Carney is an experienced politician who supports Ukraine in its struggle for independence and sovereignty. Accordingly, he is extremely uncomfortable for the master of the Kremlin. And his tough views on Trump's policies signal to the new US president that Canada is not the 51st state.
The US is leaving NATO, the end of the coalition, everyone for themselves. Europe will be left alone. NATO exercises will take place without the participation of the United States. You can catch these and other news in this broadcast.
Donald Trump waved goodbye to NATO. The US has reportedly informed its allies in the North Atlantic Alliance that it intends to cease its participation in planning future military exercises in Europe. This is reported by the Swedish press, citing high-ranking sources. If the information is confirmed, it means that European NATO countries will have to plan exercises without the Americans or with the participation of only small units of US troops.
The US may reconsider its relationship with NATO and change its position within NATO.
Thus, analysts explain that Trump is trying to cut US military spending in Europe, thereby forcing alliance countries to rely more on their own military capabilities rather than on unconditional protection from the United States.
It cannot be concluded that this is an element of blackmail, an element of pressure on the country, because the video is real. If we take a serious look at it, then the video is indeed serious. The contributions to the collective defense capability from various NATO member states, they are different, and so that ceiling, let's say, that target which exists and is set today, 2% of the gross national product, this whole target, has not been achieved by all NATO member states.
In total, about 160,000 American military personnel are currently stationed outside the United States. In theory, Trump could redistribute them so as to concentrate them around NATO countries that have increased their defense spending, leaving defenseless those who have not splurged on defense. If NATO countries do not take the statements of the American president too seriously, experts assure that the US could completely withdraw from the North Atlantic Alliance. After all, the new administration in the White House has already made it clear that Trump is much more interested in the affairs of the Indo-Pacific region. There, the US president is preparing for war with China. So far, it's economic.
Everyone understands that in case of an exit, the US leaving NATO would mean that this alliance would cease to exist. It's hard for us to say, of course. It's hard to comment on the steps and statements coming from Washington from the current administration.
He does not benefit from a united Europe in its current form. It's much more convenient for him to negotiate each time with each specific country. More precisely, with the leader of that country, who would be quite good if he were a nationalist and an isolationist, and even better if he is someone you supported during his election campaign. In other words, it's more beneficial for Trump to deal with a fragmented, divided Europe, or rather with its local ones. Call them what you like, leaders, or maybe little princes. I'm not referring to the Principality of Monaco right now. I'm talking about the principle of a feudal principality.
The first such petty principality for Trump could be Hungary. It seems that Trump can negotiate most easily with the unprincipled Viktor Orban. As a result, the White House, according to several journalists, is currently considering the possibility of the redistribution of American troops in Europe. In fact, Trump is scaring the West, particularly Germany, with the prospect of relocating the US troops stationed in the country to Hungary, leaving the Bundestag without support from American forces.
This question, once again, is just about economic benefits. So, of course, today's Europe irritates Trump and his team, and they won't miss any opportunity to break it apart.
It's not that easy to break apart Europe, as some Western tabloids write. Trump and his administration are unlikely to succeed in that. As military experts explain, it's like instantly withdrawing US troops from Germany. It's about at least 35,000 people there, as well as equipment, gear, and so on. You can't just relocate that many troops from one country to another like that. And also, although the United States supposedly intends to withdraw from participating in the upcoming NATO exercises, they won't do it anytime soon. At least for the year 2025, this won't affect the North Atlantic Alliance's exercises. For Trump, who loves to resolve everything here and now ending only with words of war in 24 hours, this is unusual.
6 weeks ago, I stood under the dome of the Capitol and proclaimed the dawn of America's golden age. In 43 days, we achieved more than most. Administrations usually achieve this in 4 or 8 years, and we're just getting started.
So, most likely, the administration of the American president and the high-ranking officials whose words Western media rely on are greatly exaggerating the situation. And immediately relocate the contingent. Clearly, there are demonstrators. No one will disrupt the North Atlantic Alliance competently.
That's all for today. Subscribe, leave comments, and give likes. And catch other news in the next episode of Hell's Point